Imagine you are an ancient Greek living 2,400 years ago, thousands of miles from any modern city lights. When you step outside after dark, what would you see? Without the light pollution of street lamps or neon signs, the night sky would be filled with more stars than you could count. In fact, it would look much like this. It's what we might imagine the night sky looked like when humans first began to settle down and live in cities. But how did people thousands of years ago spend their time when they looked up at the stars? How did they use the night sky to keep time or predict the weather? How did it influence their beliefs and daily lives? Join me as we travel back to ancient Greece to explore how the Greeks slept under the stars. The ancient Greeks loved to enjoy the outdoors and make the most of their beautiful surroundings. In warmer months, they would sleep outside under the stars to escape the heat in their homes. Ancient Greek houses didn't have air conditioning, so sleeping outside was a great way to stay cool. Can you imagine lying on a rooftop in the fresh air, listening to the crickets, and watching the stars twinkle above you? They also had some pretty comfy sleeping arrangements. Instead of a mattress, they used a thick piece of wood or stone as a base and covered it with a layer of wool or animal skins. This may not sound too comfy, but wool is actually a really good insulator, so they were probably pretty warm and cozy. They would also curl up with blankets and pillows made of wool and linen. Now let's say you're sleeping out on a rooftop and suddenly it starts raining. Don't worry, the ancient Greeks had that covered too. They would quickly pack up their things and run for cover. If they didn't have a shelter nearby, they would just huddle together under a large cloak or blanket until the rain passed. In ancient Greece, children were often encouraged to sleep outside, usually with other children in the same family or neighborhood. It was a great way for them to learn about nature and the world around them. Plus, it was a lot of fun to hang out with their friends under the stars. You can picture the scene, kids lying on their backs, pointing out constellations and making up stories about the shapes they see in the sky. Some lucky kids even got to sleep in tree houses built high up in olive or fig trees. This was especially common in rural areas where families grew their own food. It was also a great way to protect their crops from animals who liked to snack on figs. Now, if you were an adult in ancient Greece, you probably didn't sleep outside as much as children did. But that doesn't mean you missed out on the fun. Adults loved to gather together in the evenings and enjoy the night air. Imagine a group of friends sitting around a table, sipping wine and chatting about the day's events while the stars twinkled overhead. Or picture a family gathered around a fire, roasting meat and telling stories as the moon climbed higher in the sky. These simple pleasures were an important part of life in ancient Greece. When the Greeks looked up at the stars, they saw more than just twinkling lights. They saw stories, they saw omens, they saw gods. The Greeks believed that the stars were the home of the gods, and that they could influence the world below. Let's take, for example, one of the most famous constellations in the night sky, Orion the Hunter. According to Greek mythology, Orion was a giant hunter who boasted that he could hunt down any animal on Earth. But he was brought low by the goddess Artemis, who shot him with an arrow after he offended her. As he lay dying, Orion's dog, which had been chasing a wild boar, came upon him and licked his hand. To reward this final act of devotion, Artemis placed both Orion and his dog in the sky as constellations. Stories like these weren't just fun to hear, they also served an important purpose. They helped the Greeks keep track of time by watching how the stars moved across the sky. They could tell the time of year and even predict when important events would occur. For example, the rising of the Pleiades star cluster signaled the beginning of spring and the planting season. But the Greeks didn't just rely on the stars to tell the time. They also had some pretty sophisticated clocks, sundials. These devices used the position of the sun to tell the time of day. And because the sun moves across the sky in a predictable path, sundials were surprisingly accurate. Of course, there were problems. Sundials didn't work at night, and they were useless on cloudy days. But the Greeks didn't let that stop them from trying to improve their timekeeping technology. They also experimented with water clocks, which used the flow of water to measure time. Life in ancient Greece was tough. There were droughts, earthquakes, wars, and all sorts of other disasters that could wipe out entire villages. That's why it's not surprising that the Greeks were constantly looking to the stars for guidance. After all, the stars were seen as the home of the gods, and the Greeks believed that the gods had the power to control everything that happened on Earth. So when something bad happened, the Greeks would often blame themselves. They believed that their actions had offended the gods, and they would do anything they could to make amends. One way to do this was to sacrifice animals. The Greeks believed that the gods enjoyed the taste of blood, and they were willing to sacrifice anything. goats, pigs, even their own children, to show how desperate they were to please the gods. Another way to appease the gods was to pray to them. The Greeks prayed to the stars for all sorts of things. They asked for help in times of trouble. They thanked the gods for their blessings. They even tried to bribe them with promises of future sacrifices. Sometimes the Greeks would even try to avoid the gods altogether. They believed that some places were sacred, and if they stayed away from those places, the gods wouldn't bother them. That's why so many temples were built in remote areas. The Greeks believed that the gods didn't like crowds, so they would go to great lengths to avoid disturbing them. As we've seen, the stars played an important role in the lives of the ancient Greeks. They used them to tell the time, to predict the weather, and to guide their actions. The Greeks believed that the stars were the home of the gods, and they were willing to do anything to please them. So the next time you look up at the stars, remember that you're seeing more than just twinkling lights. You're seeing a window into another world. A world of myth and magic where the gods lived among the stars, and the mortals did whatever they could to win their favor. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button so I know to make more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. When you think of ancient Greek philosophers, you might picture a wise old man with a long white beard, sitting in a dusty library and writing scrolls. But did you know that most Greek philosophers didn't start shaving until they were in their 30s or 40s? Plato, one of the most famous Greek philosophers, was known for his long flowing beard, which he started growing when he was in his mid-30s. He kept it long to signify his wisdom and his connection to the divine. What do you think the Greek philosophers wrote about when they sat down to write? What kind of topics did they discuss? Surprisingly, many of their writings have survived to this day, and they provide us with a fascinating glimpse into the minds of some of the earliest thinkers in human history. One of the most famous Greek philosophers was Socrates, who is considered the founder of Western philosophy. He is best known for his contributions to ethics and epistemology, the study of knowledge, but Socrates didn't leave behind any written works. What we know about him comes from the writings of his students, such as Plato and Xenophon. Another famous Greek philosopher was Aristotle, who was a student of Plato. Aristotle is considered one of the most influential thinkers in history, and his contributions to philosophy, science, and literature are immeasurable. He was a prolific writer, and his works covered a wide range of topics, including logic, ethics, politics, rhetoric, and poetry. His systematic approach to knowledge and his emphasis on observation and reason made him a pioneer in the scientific method. Ancient Greek philosophers didn't just sit around and ponder abstract concepts. They were active participants in public life. Many of them held political office, and some even served as advisors to kings and queens. For example, Plato's Republic is an enduring work of political philosophy that explores the ideal form of government. Some Greek philosophers traveled outside of Greece to seek new ideas and perspectives. Pythagoras, for example, traveled to Egypt and India where he studied mathematics and astronomy. His contributions to mathematics are particularly noteworthy, as he is credited with the discovery of the Pythagorean theorem, which relates the sides of a right triangle. Ancient Greek philosophers were not only thinkers, but also teachers. They saw themselves as mentors and guides, helping their students to unlock their potential and discover the truth. They often taught in public spaces such as the Agora, the marketplace in Athens, where anyone who was interested could come and listen to their lectures. Today, the legacy of the ancient Greek philosophers lives on. Their ideas continue to shape Western thought, and their contributions to knowledge and wisdom are immeasurable. When you look at the great thinkers and scholars of today, you can see the influence of the ancient Greek philosophers. So the next time you see a wise old man with a long white beard, don't just assume he's a librarian. He might be a philosopher, carrying on the tradition of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Seeking wisdom and enlightenment under the stars,